out as the first one.
Sorry,
I picked this one out as the first one to respond to, and it is what is liberation as Ramana Maharshi would define it, or as you, David Godman, would define it. Little bit odd asking for my opinion since we have Bhagavan as the authority here. So I will simply pass on what Bhagavan says. He's the ultimate expert here. Liberation, according to Bhagavan, is the state in which the individual I has definitively ceased to function. It's not something you attain, it's simply what remains when the I thought, the individual I, is extinguished for good. That's a very basic definition. Bhagavan spoke or wrote of his own liberation in terms of the perceiving I retreating back into its source and permanently vanishing there. So that was how he saw it. It wasn't anything grandiose. In Arunachala Ashtakam, verse 2, which is the only place he ever wrote about his final experience, he said that he inquired into the nature of the perceiving I. He watched it disappear into its source, the heart, and it left, as it says in that verse, quote, that which is always there, unquote. So when this happened, there was a recognition that this thing, that which is always there, is Swarupa, his own true state, his own real nature. It's the real I, the real consciousness. With Bhagavan, as I said, this was a discovery. It was not an accomplishment. It was simply removing an obstructing layer that prevented him from knowing what he truly was. Liberation for Bhagavan is not something he speaks about as something mystical or blissful. It's not magical or a wonderful expansion of consciousness. In fact, the way he describes it, it's not an experience of any kind at all. It's not something that's known by a knower, experienced by an experiencer. It's simply the permanent absence of a localized perceiving I. This individual I, according to Bhagavan, is the entity that projects a world and sees it as different and separate. It's the entity that accumulates karma and suffers from its consequences. It's the entity that is reborn to start the whole cycle of birth again and again. It follows that if there is no individual I, there is no identification with an individual person, no accumulated karma, no perceived world, and no rebirth. So for him, liberation is essentially freedom from a wrong idea that he previously took to be true. In essence, it is the abandoning of an idea that there is a person who lives in a body and who sees things that are separate from that body. And I should point out this knowing is permanent and irrevocable, or it was in Bhagavan's case at least. It can never be lost because it was not something that had ever been gained. It's there all the time, and one knows it when the false perspective of the perceiving I is abandoned for good. So that's my opening explanation. The next question which I put on my list is what is the fourth state, which is called Turiya? If anyone has any follow-ups before I start that one, then Jesse can send them my way.
If you have questions, onko kysyttävää tähän äskeiseen jatkokysymyksiin, niin voi esittää. If you want to ask more about this previous question, then go ahead now, please.
I just have a comment. I mean, this is way better than an email, so thank you.
All right. So I think we'll move on.
So this is one of the other questions I received, a very basic Vedantic one, but it follows on from what I was just saying. What is the fourth state, which is called Turiya? Turiya actually means the fourth. It's the underlying state of the self in which the three states of waking, dreaming, sleep appear and disappear. Bhagavan taught that these three alternating states are states of the mind. They're not states or phases of the underlying self. So for him, the mind enters sleep and leaves it. The mind enters the dream state and leaves it, and so on. When the individual mind has been eradicated and one knows to be oneself to be the substratum, the self, the three states might still come and go on that substratum, but in the absence of an individual I, there is no longer an I who dreams, or an I who is asleep, or an I who wakes up. So what Bhagavan says is that when you know yourself to be the self, you are this substratum, you are this turiya, it's not an experience. And from this perspective, you are never in any of the three states, those states are in you. In practical terms, this means that the jnani knows himself or herself to be jnana, even if the body is asleep. There is a full awareness of oneself as consciousness all the time during waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. One never has the feeling that one goes into or comes out of these states because the entity that used to have those feelings has been eradicated. This is something I mention from time to time. If you meet someone who claims to be enlightened, ask them if his or her experience of being the self is the same at 3 a.m. when the body is in deep sleep as it is at 3 p.m. when the 3 a.m. when the body is in deep sleep as it is at 3 p.m. when the body is awake and functioning. This is one of the true hallmarks of jnana. Awareness of consciousness, of being that consciousness, is the same irrespective of what the body might be doing. All the teachers I've been associated with have said they know themselves to be an unvarying consciousness that persists irrespective of what state the body might be in. They all seem to be fully aware when they were in deep sleep, and some of them could even communicate in that state, although the next morning they weren't really aware of what they'd said or done. Bhagavan himself indicated on several occasions that he was aware of himself as consciousness, even while the body was sleeping. I think there's a famous story of Chadwick saying, I hear you snoring, how can you say that you're not really asleep? And Bhagavan said, I'm aware of the fact that I'm snoring, I enjoy it. If I didn't enjoy it, I wouldn't snore. So that there does seem to be a level of awareness of the body while the jnani is in deep sleep. There does seem to be a capacity to register in some way what's going on, but the abiding permanent state is the prajna, the pure consciousness that exists during deep sleep and is just consciousness itself. So with Bhagavan, dreams appeared to him, very wholesome dreams relative to our own. He used to dream about yogis, temples, tanks, that kind of stuff. And there was an apparent normal functioning in the waking state, but there was never a feeling in him that he was in those states. The only state he recognized as being real, permanent, as his own self, was the substratum upon which all these other things came and left. So that's my comment on Turiya. I'll move on to the next one unless someone has a comment specific to that answer.
Any comments? If not, please continue.
The next question says, people talk about awakening experiences, but if it's an experience and there still is a world to be seen, then there must be someone who is experiencing and seeing. What is awakening according to Ramana? The what is awakening, I think I covered that in the first question. It's the state in which the individual I, the perceiving I, has been definitively eradicated. The question of the experiencer is interesting. If there is an experiencer, there will be an experience of the world, and that world will be seen as different and separate from the experiencer. The experiencer is the I thought who sets itself up inside the body, projects an idea of a separate world outside itself, and then says, I see it. If there is no internal perceiving entity, there is no idea that there is a world which is external and independent. The jnani knows that manifestation, if it is there at all, is just an appearance in the self, but he never sees it from a localized perspective as something that is outside of himself or different from him. In Sanskrit, there's a nice term that covers this. It's called jnana drishti, which means the perspective or the vision of jnana. Bhagavan occasionally used this term, but he also used a Tamil equivalent called the infinite I. That's EYE, not the I pronoun. It's the idea of an I that's somehow coextensive with everything, which is aware of everything, but not seeing anything outside of itself. The infinite I, on Bhagavan's explanation, doesn't register objects, it is them, or more precisely, that in which they appear. In the infinite I, he says, there is seeing without a localized seer inside the body, and knowing without a localized knower. Knower and knowing are gone, seer and seen are gone. All that's left in this infinite I is the beingness of the self of pure consciousness. And in that consciousness, there's only seeing and knowing. This is a very hard concept to get a handle on, but the Jnanis all say that the dichotomies of both seer and seen are completely absent in the self. So let's, for a moment, go back to the question, and part of that question states, if there still is a world to be seen, then there must be someone who is experiencing it and seeing it. I agree with this, but I'm not agreeing with the implied suggestion that a Jnani sees a world in front of him. The Sanskrit term for world is loka. Murugana has pointed out that this word means, quote, that which is seen, unquote. In Advaita, the term for the world literally means perceived objects. It doesn't mean what we normally take to be the world as a tangible collection of external phenomena that interact with each other. In the absence of a perceiver, according to Advaita, there are no perceived objects, meaning if there is no perceiver, there is no world. In Advaita, the world is not simply an assemblage of external phenomena that interact with each other. It's not something, the world is not something that's assumed to be there all the time, whether it is seen or not. That's the Western idea. It is quite literally what you see, and in the absence of a seer, there is no seen, there is no world. This was spoken about or written about by Bhagavan at the beginning of Ulladu Narpadu. In the very first verse of Ulladu Narpadu, in the expanded Kalivemba version, Bhagavan wrote, quote, since we who are joined to sight perceive the world, there is an absolute agreement, or certain agreement, that there exists a first cause, which is a creative energy capable of manifesting the world's diversity. That is to say, if you see something, you have to accept that some power has caused you to see it. Now, Bhagavan is making an interesting distinction here between those who see a world and those who don't. In Bhagavan's terms, the ones who see an external world are, in his phrase, joined to sight. That is to say, they live in a world of seer and seen. According to this verse, it can only be those people who see a world and speculate about a cause. The Jnani, though, is not joined to sight. In the absence of an individual seer, that's the state of jnana, there is no perceived world, since the two are inextricably joined together. The Jnani never needs to ask the question, what is the cause or source of this world that I see in front of me, because he never sees via an individual seer anything that is separate from him. There is an innate knowledge and a direct experience that all manifestation is Brahman, but that manifestation is never seen or known as an object. That's all I have to say on that for the moment, unless somebody has something else to see. There's a related question which I'll answer next if there is no comment.
Is there comments?
Yes, can you, David, help us with this perspective? For example, now, can we say that we are 13 mistakes here, and there is nothing but, yes, there is nothing but one rope, but seemingly 13 snakes. And we are in this paradox saying that if I am going to dream, to sleep, the world disappears. So just I'm asking you to expand this idea of Ekajiva Vada.
Okay.
And
coincidentally, fortuitously, that's the next question I have on my list. Somebody sent a question which says, are there many egos or just one ego who is dreaming? So I can talk about that a little bit in the next answer, but apropos the other comment you made, yes, according to Bhagavan, the world is not there unless somebody sees it, because the world itself is defined as that which is seen. It's not something that has a permanent physical nature which exists whether you look at it or not. According to Vedanta, according to Advaita, it's very narrowly defined as an object of perception. So if there is no one seeing it, there quite literally is nothing there to be seen. Shall I continue?
Yes, I think so. Go ahead.
So as I hinted, the next one is, are there many egos or just one ego who is dreaming? Now, this really is a sticky, complicated topic. I won't go into it in great detail unless somebody later really wants to discuss it. From the Ajata perspective, the no creation at all perspective, which Bhagavan said was his own direct experience and the experience of everyone who realizes the self, there are no egos at all. The question is asking, are there many egos or just one? It's not a choice between one or many if you're following Ajata or Gaudapada. The truth is there are no egos at all. It's not a choice between one or many. Gaudapada's famous verse, which Bhagavan himself translated and included in his collected works, says, there is no creation of the world, there's no dissolution of the world, there's no one striving for liberation and no one attaining it. On this perspective, jivas simply don't exist. They're not there, they're not suffering, they're not striving, they're not attaining, they have no existence whatsoever. And this Gaudapada says is the final truth, or the Sanskrit term paramartha, which they means ultimate, final, incontestable truth. And Bhagavan concurred with this. As I said, he translated this verse and he put it in his collected works at the end of the 9 stray verses. However, he did say that if you are not aware of this as your own experience as being the true state of affairs, then you have to accept that the I, which appears to see a world, is creating that world appearance in the same way that a dreamer creates a dream world. So if you see a world through an individual eye, then you have to accept, according to Bhagavan, or the best explanation, the best model to use is that you are dreaming a dream world in front of you, and that when you wake up from that dream world will end, and so will the dreamer who dreamt it. The characters, the landscapes in the dream world are all the product of that one original dreamer. So from that perspective, the question was about Ekajiva. There is only one ego, there is only one jiva who dreams the dream. And when his dream ends and he wakes up, then the number of egos goes down to 0. So it's not multiple or one, it's either 1 or 0. But only when you wake up from that dream can you say with authority and from direct experience, there are no egos, self alone exists. Before that, there's just one seeing ego. This is very hard to defend logically, experientially, but Bhagavan said it's the most productive attitude to adopt if one is trying to escape from the idea of individual identity. The best way to explain this rather paradoxical state of affairs is usually the dream analogy, that there's a story which I particularly like that derives from the Upanishads. Bhagavan once gave a version of it to Annamalai Swami. I think it covers the paradoxes and the what's real and what's not real aspects of this quite nicely. So Bhagavan said there is a man who was asleep in a hut in the forest, and he starts to dream. In that dream, he goes out into the forest, he wanders around, bad things happen to him, he gets afraid, he starts to suffer in the forest. He eventually meets up with a deva, who in this story is a kind of substitute for the guru, and the guru gives him advice and says, you must go back to this house, and directs him to the house where his body is actually asleep on the bed inside. So he starts going back to that house in the forest, and just before he gets there, the man inside the room wakes up. Now, what is the status? What's the reality of the dream? Did the person in the house ever journey out into a forest? Did he suffer? Did he ever meet a guru who directed him back to where he started? The answer is no, except in dreamland, except in dream world, in the dream world. The man, for the person inside that house, quite literally nothing happened. It only ever happened as an act of imagination to the person who had the dream. He dreamed up a landscape, he dreamed up his suffering, he dreamed up his quest. He met a teacher who directed him in the right direction. And when he woke up, there was a knowledge, there was an understanding that the dream world never existed and that nothing had ever happened to him. It's the waking up from the dream that reveals the truth that nothing has ever happened, that no one has ever suffered, that no one went on the search, and so on. So the Ajata perspective in the story corresponds to the sleeping person in the room. No one got out of bed, nobody went out, nobody got lost, nobody suffered and returned. It was all totally a dream, all totally imagination. So any comments, follow-ups on that?
So,
I
I
for
have a question
example,
about that. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
first, Jeff, please.
So approaching it from a perspective then that like even this, everything is just a dream, and then that brings some peace of mind because eventually I'm going to wake up from it. I mean, and having that perspective is an effective way to practice. Then I don't know if that question makes sense or.
But Bhagavan did say, he said it's not the final truth, it's not what's completely true about the world, but he said it's a very helpful attitude to have. He said if you can have the conviction that everything you see is a dreamlike creation, then you're going to take it a lot less seriously. You're not going to be as invested in outcomes, and you're more willing to accept the reality of a substratum, something on which the dream is taking place. You'll simply lose your conviction that what you see is a reality and that that's the only sphere in which you function. He said it's a good attitude to have. It lessens your attraction, your investment in the world, and helps you go back to the substratum on which the dream manifests.
Okay. Says right before I got on, I was reading that exact story. It was it's a very similar story that's in Elam Andre, that's in All Is One, and I've been reading that. That is a cool book. So that's all. Thanks.
We're being very psychic tonight. Every time somebody says something, it's the next question on my list. So shall I carry on?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so we're done with the hardcore philosophy for now. The next question says, have you ever tried writing down the book Elam Andre, like Annamalai Swami did? And what other thoughts do you have regarding that book? I probably need to explain what this is. It's a very little known text. Elam Andre, Tamil means all is one. Elam, everything, Andre, one. It's an obscure 19th century Tamil text on Advaita. Quite a small booklet. You could probably read it in 20 minutes. I read it when I discovered that Bhagavan had recommended it to Annamalai Swami, but I can't remember being especially moved or excited by it. It's one of the few texts that was in circulation in Bhagavan's lifetime that didn't, think, wow, that's great. I'll go back to that. That's a really good text. At the time, it just to me seemed to be a standard tract on Advaita. It's good. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but the question is, what thoughts you have regarding the book? I would just say it's a basic standard text on what's real and what's not. And I think Bhagavan gave it to Annamalai Swami because he used to tailor his advice to devotees' psyches, to their specific needs. I think he knew that Annamalai Swami would appreciate and benefit from reading this kind of text because he was following a path of affirmation and negation. I am the self, I am consciousness, I am Brahman, I am not this, I am not that. So he tended to like traditional Advaitic methods of practice, and Bhagavan gave him traditional texts to read and encouraged him to study them, even though he was, at least when he first arrived at Ramanashram, barely literate. In all Bhagavan recommended Annamalai Swami read 6 texts. This was one of them. They were all texts from this genre. I think Ribhu Gita was there, Ashtavakra Gita, Kaivalya Navanitam was on the list, Swarupa Saram. To be honest, I got a lot more out of reading Swarupa Saram, which was another fairly obscure and small book on this list that Bhagavan gave out. Helped by Venkata Subramanian, the Tamil Pandit I worked with for years, I ended up translating and publishing Swarupa Saram about 10 years ago. I'll be happy to answer any questions on that text and its author if anyone wants to ask a question about it, but for now, I'll carry on responding to this specific query. The question said, have you ever tried writing it down? Because that's what Annamalai Swami was told to do, and that's what he did. This is an interesting part of Bhagavan's teachings, or rather Bhagavan's approach to devotees and what they should be doing. Bhagavan often asked specific devotees to write down texts or memorize them or chant them. And oddly enough, they would often be texts in a language they didn't even know. The Tamil devotees would be asked to learn something in Sanskrit. Bhagavan just seemed to make it hard. And Annamalai Swami was doubly handicapped on this because he could barely even read his native language. Bhagavan made him write out texts. And Annamalai Swami said, if somebody else writes them down for me, I'll read them, but I'm just not very good at writing. I only went to school for a few days when I was 5. My writing is terrible. And Bhagavan would say, no, you'll get the benefits by doing the writing. Learn to write properly, write, and you will absorb the text that way. Similarly, when other devotees complained about the effort and the energy required to do all this writing or this memorization or this chanting, Bhagavan would often reply, just do it, you'll reap the benefits later. And Annamalai Swami himself told me about a woman, what she asked, I think she was asked to memorize Upadesha Undiyar. I think it was that text. Maybe I'm misremembering which one it was. She did it somewhat reluctantly, but only after Bhagavan promised future benefits. I published this particular story in his biography, Living by the Words of Bhagavan, in the 1990s. And a few years later, maybe around the turn of the century, I received an email from a woman in New Delhi who said that one of her elderly relatives was the person who had to memorize the text back at Ramanashram in the 1930s or 40s. She contacted her old relative after reading the story, and the relative said that the verses were still chanting themselves inside her, and that they seemed to quieten her mind as the chanting was going on. So in that particular case, the long-term benefits promised by Bhagavan were actually confirmed. Bhagavan, as I said, he made Annamalai Swami write stuff down, even though he could barely write. And when Annamalai Swami complained, Bhagavan told him that writing down a text produced 10 times more benefit than simply reading it out loud. He once told Annamalai Swami even that translating it was 10 times more effective than writing it down. So here we have a hierarchy of reading it level 1, 10 times better than that is writing it down, and 10 times better again, so 100 times better than the initial casual read is actually putting the work in to translate it properly. There's something to this because I personally strongly believe that focusing on the words of jnanis, writing them down, editing them, translating them, accesses their power in a unique way. A jnani's words are a vehicle for the power of the self. By listening to them, writing them down, letting them settle inside oneself, one is accessing the same power, the same source that brought those words into existence. So if people ever ask me for book recommendations, which they often do, I just say, read the words of jnanis and read them in such a way that the words settle in the heart rather than being thought about by the mind. Don't read them with the idea that you'll think about them or try and decide if they're true or not, or have discussions with yourself about the validity. Try to read the words in such a way that the words bypass the mind completely settle in the heart, and there the truth and power of those words might fully reveal themselves to you. An analogy that I thought of fairly recently, I think, is quite appropriate here. I think we're all Westerners. We all know how football works. Imagine the guru is the person taking the penalty in a football game, and that the mind is the goalkeeper standing behind the line. The guru kicks the ball towards the goal, and the goalkeeper gets very excited. He stops it, feels very pleased with himself that he stopped it, and rolls it back to the guru to have another kick. He's completely missing the point of what the guru is trying to do. The mind, the goalie, just has to get out of the way. He has to walk out of the goal mouth. He has to completely take himself out of the picture so the guru can kick the ball and get it in the back of the net. But what we all tend to do, we hear the guru's words and we think, oh, I understand this, or oh, I don't understand, I'll have a discussion. So the ball goes backwards and forwards, guru, goalkeeper, guru, goalkeeper. All you really have to do is say, no, these words have power. I'm not going to think about them. I'm not going to interrupt their flow. I'm going to let them move to their designated designation, which is the heart. I'm going to let them settle down there. I'm going to let them do their work. So my advice is find the words of jnanis, assimilate them in such a way that they bypass the mind as much as possible, let them settle in the heart and let them do their work there by themselves. Those words are not an invitation to you to think, argue, choose, decide, discuss. They're words of power. The guru is planting them inside you with the sole intention of activating your consciousness. Let him do his work. Don't try and interrupt it. Don't try and disturb what he's doing. Let the words filter into you and let them do their work in the heart. About 40 years ago, I went to stay at Lakshmana's ashram in Andhra Pradesh. Jesse mentioned him in the intro. My aim was to go there, meditate. He had a very, very powerful presence, a very powerful darshan. And I just thought, I'm going to take time off working, thinking, writing. I'm just going to sit there in silence with him. After a few weeks, he asked me to write a book, and that set a pattern, if you like. It just seems to be my destiny that whenever I go to these ashrams, within a few weeks, somebody says, you over there, write a book. About 10 years later, I went to Lucknow because Papaji invited me there to write a book about him. So at some point, I always say yes to these people. I mentioned to Papaji that going to see teachers such as him usually resulted in a request to write a book. So I asked him directly if spending a lot of my time thinking and writing about the teachings instead of trying to experience them in silence was somehow missing the point of being in the presence, or missing the point of what those words were supposed to be doing while I was there. So he gave me a very individual answer. He replied more or less. He said, thinking about words of truth intently, because you have to edit and arrange them, enables you to access their power in a way that casually listening to them or reading them doesn't. He actually said, this is your blessing in this life. You've been picked out to write these books. In doing this, you have to think intently about the words that are imbued with the power of the self. Sooner or later, that power will reveal itself to you. So this, I think, is what Annamalai Swami was speaking about when he told stories about Bhagavan, insisting that certain devotees memorize, chant, or write down teachings that originated in the experience of a jnani. I think somehow, although thinking about the words can actually sometimes obstruct the effectiveness, there are other occasions when intense focus on them can somehow initiate a flow of Shakti in such a way that you start to experience the truth of those words as they were told to you. Now, this transformation through hearing the words, through writing jnani's words down, is usually a gradual process, but there are a couple of spectacular instances when Bhagavan's spoken words had an immediate effect. I don't know if we have time for this, Jesse. There are two stories I like to tell whenever I get in the mood talking about this. We're not short on time tonight?
No, we have time as long as we want.
Okay. They're both stories about the power of the Jnani's words to utterly transform the one who hears them. The first one is about a Tamil lady called Akalandama. Akalandama was a child widow. She came from an era where you were married off when you were 6, 7, 8 years old. And if your husband died before the marriage was consummated, that was your one chance at marriage, and you were a widow for the rest of your life because widows don't remarry. So that was her destiny in a way, stuck when she was a child. So when she grew up, she started traveling around, serving and feeding all the saints that she could find. There were several on her roster, including Bhagavan in Tiruvannamalai. And she lived about 40 kilometers away. Desor, her town was called Desor. Her other name was Desor Amma, the mother from Desor. She would walk 40 kilometers with provisions on her head and serve the sadhus at Virupaksha cave, make food for them, cook for them, and then go back to her hometown. So she turned up one day on a full moon day. I don't know if this was planned or not, but on full moons at Virupaksha cave, everybody there would shave their heads because that was the tradition amongst sadhus in those days. Bhagavan also had a shave on full moon. And when Akalandama showed up with her parcels of food, somebody there said, "Oh, today is a very auspicious day. Go up to Bhagavan and ask for some upadesha, some teaching. It's a great day to receive teachings. Full moon's very auspicious for this kind of thing." And she said, "But I have nothing to say. I have no questions to ask." But the person who was telling her this wouldn't listen to her and pushed her in front of Bhagavan, who was toweling his head. And when he saw Akalandama there looking a bit self-conscious, he said, "What do you want?" And she said, "Tell me something." And Bhagavan said, "Well, what do you want to know?" And Akalandama said, I have no idea. I just got pushed up here and told to ask you a question because today was an auspicious day for receiving teachings. Bhagavan laughed. He realized what was going on. And then he must have seen that this was a moment where the words he was giving out, the Upadesha, could touch her heart directly. He said a very, very complicated literary philosophical statement that can be translated as "be without letting go of yourself." It was utterly meaningless to Akalandama. It had some philosophical import and was delivered with some force. And Akalandama said, when she told her life story to Sadhu Om about 50 years later, she said, "Let the Pandits argue and debate what these words, 'be without leaving yourself,' mean. I have no interest in discovering the meaning because in the moment that Bhagavan said those words, I got the direct experience of what those words were pointing at. I didn't need to understand those words because the moment he uttered those words, they entered my heart and they gave me the full experience of what those words were telling me to do." So in this particular case, a simple short sentence by Bhagavan to a lady who was uneducated, illiterate, had the capacity to bypass her mind. Those words went straight into her heart. And when she recounted this story to Sadhu Om about 50 years later, she said, "Yes, the words went into my heart, and in the heart I experienced the truth of those words. They didn't go anywhere near my mind, they just landed in the heart and I experienced the truth of them." So this is the power of the Jnani's words. It's the power of the order given by a Jnani. But perhaps the most spectacular case that I know in the Bhagavan world is an even shorter instruction, which was given to a devotee who later became known as Tinai Swami. And when he started coming to Bhagavan in the 1940s, he was a very well-educated professor of biochemistry, I think. He was such a good scholar, he'd actually earned a research scholarship to go to the United States and study in the US, which I imagine was quite a big thing for an academic in southern India at that time. but there was some politics at his university. His particular posting was cancelled and it was given to a much more junior member of his department who wasn't as good, wasn't as well published, wasn't as well qualified. It was pure politics. And so the professor resigned in disgust. And he had already been to Tiruvannamalai a few times and enjoyed it. So he just thought, I'm leaving. I'm not staying in this department anymore. I'll go to Tiruvannamalai and see Bhagavan and start doing some tapas there. So he came, he fell in love with Bhagavan. He had long periods of meditation, Virupaksha cave, very intense practice. And he mentioned to someone, Michael James told me, a mutual acquaintance of ours, he told, I'm here to become Bhagavan. I'm not here to be a devotee of Bhagavan. I'm here to become Bhagavan. So he had serious spiritual intent. He wasn't a dilettante. He wasn't an amateur. He'd come there definitely with the intention of having a direct experience of the self. After some time, he was a family man. He had a family to support. And after some time, he was informed that there was a job he was qualified for in Pondicherry, and that he thought, well, I better make some attempt to look after my family. I've still got a family to look after. I'll go for an interview in Pondicherry. So the tradition at Ramanashram wasn't that you walked into the hall and told Bhagavan, I'm off to Pondicherry for an interview, or I'm doing this, I'm doing that. You went and you explained what you were planning to do next, and then you would say, may I take leave? You were asking permission to go and do it rather than telling Bhagavan what you were going to do. This is the tradition, always has been in Tamil, that you say, may I take leave to do this? So Bhagavan just looked at him and said one word, Iru, I-R-U. Iru is the imperative of the verb to be. It's the imperative of the verb to stay. So Bhagavan effectively was saying, stay here and be. And this one word was so powerful, so life transforming. It put Tinaswami in that state of beingness. And he stayed there unwaveringly for the next 55 years. He never went back to his family in Chennai. He never took the job in Pondicherry. He just wandered off to where he was staying, sat on the doorstep, and went into a kind of deep samadhi that he was in and out of for many years. That this is the most powerful one word order I know about in Bhagavan's whole career. It completely transformed a man from being, let me say, a keen meditator, someone who was interested in realization, but was still interested in worldly matters. He was still thinking about getting a job. But that one word pierced his being so completely that after hearing that word, he no longer had any capacity to do anything except remain in a more or less introverted state of beingness for the rest of his life. And he stayed there, looked after in the Sadhu Om compound for well over 50 years. I think he finally passed away on Deepa morning 2003. So those two long stories there. If anyone wants to follow up, not quite about the question, but I like telling those stories. Any follow-ups to this?
Go ahead.
Yes, David, I would like to ask, is it like letting these words go into your heart, like taking them into your heart means, to put it simply, just means to believe completely what you hear. But you know that there is a guru in a full sense of this word. So your trust is so big from the very beginning, and when you come to Guru, you just understand that whatever he says, it is just absolute truth, nothing but truth. So you just believe. Like for example, in traditional Christian. In Christian traditions, saints, they just believed Christ and fully trusted his words, and and just followed, and that's it. That they didn't search for anything else, because he was for them God, and whatever he says, it's just full truth that they just have to believe and follow, and that's it.
There's two aspects of this. I think in the case of a guru issuing a command, he's not even asking you to believe in it. I think it's a direct order. Iru is an imperative. Summa Iru was the phrase that Bhagavan used the most frequently. And Summa Iru means be quiet, be still. The Iru means both stay and be, and the Sumu means quiet or still. So you can have any permutation of those: be quiet, be still, stay quiet, stay still. And I've talked to teachers about this, and they say, we're not asking you to practice being still. We're not asking you to do anything. You're not in this picture at all. We are giving a command to consciousness to reveal itself as consciousness. So we're not asking you to accept the words at face value. It's not a statement such as you are consciousness, which we're asking you to believe. Somehow the power of the self is issuing a command: be still, be quiet. And that command goes to the consciousness that you have. And if you can get out of the way, it's not a matter of believing or accepting. If you can get out of the way so completely, that command touches consciousness and reveals itself to you. So in that sense, it's not even a belief. It's a complete getting out of the way. Back to the football analogy, just walk away, let the words hit the spot, and then you have the experience. But there are instances of the kind that you describe, and perhaps as you were saying it, I was reminded of Nisargadatta Maharaj. He said that he hadn't realized the self when his guru passed away, but his guru had told him, you are Brahman, don't ever forget you are Brahman. And he said he thought about this a lot, and he couldn't understand why he'd been told this. It didn't seem to be a relevant teaching for him. I don't know why he thought it was irrelevant. He just said, I couldn't understand why I'd been given this particular piece of information. It didn't seem to correspond to my state, and I didn't know what to do with the statement that my guru had given me. And then he said, one day, the truth dawned on me. He said, why would my guru ever lie to me? What he said must be the truth. So he said, in that moment of understanding that my guru could never tell me anything that wasn't true, this you are Brahman statement became my own truth, my own reality. So it came about simply because he knew that his own teacher would never tell him anything that wasn't true, and that having said it, it must be very important. So having the full faith that what the guru had said was true, he said, yes, that must be true. Siddharameshwar has said that. That must be my true nature, my true state. And because his belief in his teacher was so great, his devotion to the teacher was so great, he actually went into that state immediately and stayed in it. So that there's two aspects of this. In some points, it's a command. The guru was saying, be still, be quiet. And if you get out of the way, then you get the direct experience. But in the case of someone like Maharaj, there does have to be an element of belief. He had absolute conviction that his guru couldn't possibly be telling him something that wasn't true. And that belief, that conviction ultimately gave him the experience.
Yes, but I just wanted to, how in normal, I mean, in terms that we are used to, you can call it, right? I mean, that to remove yourself from this, how it's the only way to remove it is just completely believe, and that's it. In this way, you are removing all your own ideas, all your own attitudes. You just, because yes, I think what you described about Dinai Swami when Bhagavan said Summa Iru, just Iru, he said. It was, I think it was like how it's like a very unique connection, very unique meeting. It's like one in a lifetime, like meeting when Guru just does something with you without even your permission, without your knowing, without anything. Just you came to this point and he did it, and that's it. I mean, that it happened just like that. But when you say that because Chinnaswami, it seems he didn't even need to do anything about that. He was just caught by Bhagavan, and that's it. Bhagavan did. There was no Chinnaswami at that moment, I think.
Right.
And but in other cases, like with Nisargadatta, for example, he it's really very amazing, very lovely story about Nisargadatta, I think, because he really trusted. He was thinking, I think that Guru doesn't want to do anything bad to me. So I mean that whatever he does, all is good. So he just accepted, he just believed, because Nisargadatta, he was very much interested in this himself, I think. So he like we now say, he had very big motivation. And I mean that, so maybe in simple words, we can call it like a complete trust, Guru's words. I mean, you just accept whatever he says because it is true, and whatever. The only thing what you have to do is just remove yourself, in the sense that you have to just stop thinking about anything that can contradict, in your opinion, to what Guru said. In this way, I meant.
I don't think that you can say, I will now take myself out of the picture so completely and allow the Guru's words to work. I think what does happen, I have to say very rarely, these aren't common occurrences, is that the Guru or Bhagavan, whoever it is, somehow sees a moment. It's like a gap, and there's a recognition that in that moment, there's a possibility of a word having this very powerful effect. So in the case of Akalandama, he must have known that she was uneducated and wouldn't have any capacity to understand what he was saying. So he knew in that moment, as he was saying it, that he wasn't giving her an instruction to practice, that he was putting the words directly into her. He must have known and seen, this is a moment, her heart is open, I can plant some words in there, and she'll have the experience of those words. And maybe he was thinking, I'll make them so complicated, just to be safe, I'll make such a complicated statement she can't even think about it or understand it. And I think possibly he must have seen Chinnaswami was in that receptive state, and he just said the word Iru, cancelled his career, changed his whole destiny in a way. There is, now what's the name of this woman? There's a French woman who wrote a book about Bhagavan. I've forgotten the title of it, but I saw her notebooks. They were in French. A lady in Ramanashram was translating them. Anya, her name was. And she actually recorded Bhagavan saying, sometimes I see people are in a state receptive to hear words of truth and experience those words as I say them. When I see this moment, then I say something strong and powerful, and they get the true experience of the self. So there seems to be some radar in Bhagavan that recognizes a moment, that thinks, this person is ready for it. I will say Suma Iru, or I will say be without leaving yourself. I don't think he's using a scattergun approach. He's not saying this every day and hoping somebody gets it. I think once in a while he sees an opportunity, the clouds clear, if you like, inside somebody's mind, and there's a little gap and there's an open channel all the way through to the heart, and he thinks great, and he puts some words in there and they have an immediate effect. So I think he has that capacity. It didn't happen very often, and the number of instances are rare, but it did happen, and it does prove the general point that if you happen to have a one-on-one with a guru, and if your mind is suitably receptive, one word can put you into that state for the rest of your life.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to, it's interesting that we are now like trying to explain it in I mean, just try to really like explain it in some more sophisticated terms. But I mean that maybe this is the case when the disciple is ripe enough, then it happens, and he meets Guru, and this just happens. I mean that it is not from my point of view. Just Bhagavan was maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. Maybe he was not irrelevant, but I mean that he didn't care what I mean that he has to like making someone awake someone that like has this idea that he has to work on about that he has to awake as much people as possible like, to lead to this state. I think maybe it's something like spontaneous, something like I mean it just happens and that's it when you are ready. And
There's a Upanishadic saying that the Atman chooses whom it will. I don't know if you know this. There's a sense that nobody ever really understands who gets it and who doesn't. All the commentaries on this text emphasize that it may look as if there's a mature devotee in front of the guru. Everyone might think he's the best person there, but then, you know, person at the back who only walked in 10 minutes before for the first time is the one who gets it. That there's a mysterious element of who gets it and who doesn't, and it's not necessarily the ones who appear to be the most evolved, the most mature. Even the gurus themselves say, I have no idea, you know, who's going to get it. Somebody will, but somehow the self chooses whom it will. There's an element of randomness. We hear about the success stories. We don't hear so much about the people who look like they were good, mature devotees who sat there for 50 years and didn't get it. There's something very mysterious about how these words, how these teachings, how this presence interacts with the mind and occasionally destroys it completely. There's no knowing who it's going to happen to. It's a bit like the half-life, radioactive decay. You don't know which particular particle is going to be the one. You just know that over time, a certain number in that space are going to rot and decay. So it's the same. If there's a guru with that power, with that presence, you just know that sooner or later, people are going to lose their minds completely, irrevocably. But often it's almost impossible to predict who or why or when.
And also maybe, I mean, that your development of your mind, maybe the mind should not even be that much, I mean, developed on the opposite. I mean, that on the contrary, I mean, that, for example, if we look at, goodness, I think I will not remember, repeat. Yes, and also Lakshmi. Also, it's just it is animal. So I mean that, but it is not about that. It is just about something else. That and even with Bhagavan, it happened spontaneously. He was just like normal, almost normal boy, right? And then all of a sudden this happened. It's something.
I would differ on that. I'm moving more and more towards the opinion that Bhagavan was a great Arunachala Bhakta all through his childhood. The opening verse of Arunachala Ashtakam says, from Arivu Aru. Arivu Aru means from an age before I could even think rationally, coherently. It's sometimes translated as the age of innocence, sometimes earliest childhood. The general connotation is it's an age where you haven't learned anything for yourself, you haven't been told things, you're a bit of a blank slate. It's a toddler age where your brain hasn't really formed properly. And Bhagavan is saying from that Arivu Aru, the immensity, the greatness of Arunachala was shining in my awareness. I think it hooked him really early on, and for most of his childhood, the power of Arunachala was compelling his attention towards it. He didn't know what it was. He didn't realize it was a place he could go to. For him, it simply symbolized God or the divine. And there was a recognition that the power of the divine was compelling his attention. It was ripening him. It was pulling him towards it. And at the age of 16, it brought about his death experience. So I don't think that was a random incident that had no history. I think Bhagavan had spent at that point 12 years being internally obsessed with Arunachala, thinking about it, or rather being non-volitionally being sucked into an awareness of it. There's just one or two little fragments where he talks about it in Rangan's account. Bhagavan casually mentioned when we were playing football together, you thought I was involved in the game. I wasn't. I was thinking about Arunachala. Arunachala was pulling me into states of stillness while we were playing football together. So what once in a while, I wish more people had asked about this, and I wish Bhagavan had talked about it more, because there are endless verses in Aksharamanamala when he's talking about how the power of Arunachala, the grace of Arunachala, the love of Arunachala, the thought of Arunachala brought about his liberation. He never says, I got liberated by doing self-inquiry. In all the instances where he gives a cause, it's always Arunachala. And from the earliest childhood, the power of Arunachala was pulling him into itself, rightening him to the point where one spontaneous act of self-inquiry was enough for him to gain liberation. So that he was a ripe fruit waiting to fall. I think one of his verses, he actually says that Arunachala forced me like a fruit to look at Arunachala, to be ripened by those rays of grace from Arunachala, and then Arunachala picked me and ate me. So that there's this feeling of somehow being on Arunachala's radar, being picked out, especially by Arunachala, being ripened by Arunachala. And then the moment came when he was 16. There was a fear of death. And Bhagavan himself has said that these kinds of fears of death tend to come when the ego is threatened with complete dissolution. So it only bubbled up to the surface when he was 16, simply because his ego was about to disappear anyway. He wasn't the normal, energetic, playful 16-year-old anymore. Arunachala had completely rotted him out from the inside, if you like. His jiva was so attenuated, it was actually on the point of disintegrating. And that's when he started to feel the fear when he was 16. And at that moment, he lay on the floor, or he was there already. And the single question, who am I, was uttered in that moment, and he found the answer to it. But all the heavy lifting, all the previous work had been done by his intense love, his intense thought of Arunachala. And all through his Arunachala poetry, he's saying it was the thought of Arunachala that liberated me. He never ever says it was his self-inquiry or anything else. He always attributes it to the grace and power of the mountain, and specifically to this thought which was occupying his whole life. And he did this in a very private way. Now, this is something that only occurred to me recently as well, a few months ago. I was looking at the note he wrote just before he left home, and it says, in search of my father and in obedience to his command, I have embarked on a virtuous enterprise. Now, he doesn't say Arunachala in that. Off he goes to Arunachala, and his family have absolutely no idea where he's gone. And I thought, wait a minute, this boy has been obsessing over Arunachala for 12, 13 years, since he was a toddler. And then he leaves home, and no one thinks, oh, he's gone off to Arunachala, let's go and look for him there. I didn't realize just how private Bhagavan had been about this till I looked at this note a few months ago and thought he never told anybody about this. He never told his mother, he never told his brothers. It was something so completely private for him that when he went missing, no one had the slightest idea, or even the remotest idea he'd gone to this place called Arunachala. And he was only discovered there by accident a couple of years later. So he had this immense pull into Arunachala, kept it private, kept it secret. That power corroded his sense of identity so completely that it was bringing about his destruction when he was 16. And in that moment, a spontaneous act of inquiry happened, and he realized the self. But it was all due to this years and years of obsessing with Arunachala that he never told anyone about.
And he was obsessed by Arunachala subconsciously, unconsciously. So I mean that he was ripe, just.
I
open
think
to-
his attention was being pulled to it. I don't think it was anything he put any effort into. There was just a deep, abiding love, an attention that couldn't go anywhere else. I think his mind was sucked towards this idea, this concept of Aranacula. There was a great love towards it, and he simply had no. He wasn't trying to become one with it. He wasn't trying to attain it. It was simply there. It was something that compelled him to look at it all the time, and in the end, that was enough. That internal awareness of Aranacula, which he calls the thought of Aranacula, was enough to finish him off.
Thank you.
So yeah.
Does anyone have questions, or is there still questions, David, in the list?
Oh, I've got several more questions.
Okay.
I can carry on.
Yeah, there's one question came on the chat box. Maybe I can take it here so I won't forget it.
Okay.
Just, I'll find it here. Someone asked that Maharishi has mentioned that the mind has to be directed to a certain point inside of us. What is this point, and what does this mean, to direct our attention or mind to a certain point inside of us? Is there
I
some...
don't think this is true. Bhagavan generally never asked people to put their attention on any particular spot in the body or inside the body. If you think about how self-inquiry works and how it doesn't work, the whole idea of putting attention on a spot is something that maintains the I thought as a separate entity, and it's putting focus on an object. So he said, if the I is there looking at or focusing on an object, then you're not getting rid of the I, you're strengthening it. You're using its powers of concentration to sustain itself. So that was his argument against, for example, putting attention on the heart center on the right side of the chest. He accepted that the right side heart center was the place in the body where consciousness entered the body and animated the body. And from there, it went from the heart to the brain and created the world around us, if you like. But he never said that the way to go back to the heart was by concentrating on this place on the right side of the body. He said it's a piece of information, it's experiential. He said he had experienced it for himself, but he said you can't get back to that heart, which has no dimension, which has no place, by focusing on it in a particular place in the body. So he said, if you do want to put your attention on a place in the body, then the heart center is the best place to do it. But he never recommended it as a practice, and he definitely didn't associate it with self-inquiry. He said self-inquiry is to be solely and uninterruptedly aware of the subject, and not to let attention stray out to objects and not to connect with objects. So I'm a little bit suspect of this idea of Bhagavan saying that you have to put attention or direct attention to a particular place in the body, because all of the teachings I've read on that are him saying, no, that's not what you do. If you put attention on a place or a location, then you're reinforcing your sense of individual identity. You're not getting rid of it.
Thank you.
Oh, can I there's a lovely analogy. Annamalai Swami told me this. It's in one of his books. He was concentrating on the heart center, thinking that's what Bhagavan's teachings were. This was soon after he came, and he told Bhagavan about this. He said, no. And Bhagavan said, your heart center is like the electricity meter in your body. And I think this is a really amazing analogy. It works really well. He said, you don't get this. Then this was Annamalai Swami's explanation, not Bhagavan's. He said, yes, it's the place where the current enters your body and then spreads out to the rest of the body. but he said you don't get the electric shock, you don't get the experience of electricity by staring at the meter all day. He said you can stare at the meter as long as you like, but you're not going to get any electric current. So that was Annamalai Swami's explanation of what Bhagavan had said, that the heart center is the equivalent of the meter in the body. It's just the place where the universal energy enters the body. And it was Annamalai Swami's extrapolation of that, which I liked, which is you can stare at the meter box all day, but you won't get the electricity out of it.
That's nice. So should we continue with the questions you have, or is there some other questions at the moment from other people around at the moment? Does somebody has something to ask related to these previous ones? If not, then we can continue, David.
Okay. We're finally round to self-inquiry. Right. What is the relation and difference between keeping quiet and self-inquiry? Does self-inquiry lead to a silent mind, or is a silent mind the basis for practicing self-inquiry? I really like this question. Let's start with, is a silent mind the basis for practicing self-inquiry? And to that question, I will ask a counter question, which is anything necessary to do before you can start the practice of self-inquiry? So in other words, what, according to Bhagavan, are the qualifications or prerequisites required to do self-inquiry and do it effectively? There is a school of thought that says that the mind needs to be quiet in order for self-inquiry to be effective. The people who say this then might also claim that we need to do preliminary practices in order to get ready for doing good self-inquiry. My understanding is that Bhagavan never encouraged this attitude, since he felt that all other methods were not merely indirect, they were also ineffective, since they put attention on objects rather than the subject. This is what I was talking about a few minutes ago, about why Bhagavan didn't say put attention on a place in the body, because that's putting attention on an object. If you put attention on an object, that might be good for improving one's concentration, or it might increase or improve one's devotion. But concentration on an object is not good for eliminating the thinker of thoughts. That's really the point of self-inquiry. And if you project attention outwards, if you extrovert attention onto objects, you're maintaining and feeding the I thought, you're not diminishing it. However, having said that, Bhagavan did sometimes say that one could do japa or pranayama if the mind was too chaotic and uncontrolled to start inquiry well. But then he would often say that as soon as some measure of quietness had been established through these preliminary aids, one should switch to inquiry and stick to it. So to some extent, in some cases, he did sometimes agree that certain preliminary exercises might quieten the mind a bit and were a good way to start the practice, but only if the mind couldn't be quietened by inquiry alone. As a counter example to this is Bhagavan sometimes saying that some form of preliminary exercise might be useful or helpful. But there's a good counter example of this. It's a wonderful story that Kanji Swami told, which I think showed Bhagavan's utter disdain for or lack of interest in preliminary practices. And it also shows his conviction that he didn't think, not only did he think they were not necessary, he didn't think they were useful, he didn't think they worked. The story starts when a bunch of villagers came into the hall and asked Bhagavan, I think the question is, what's the quickest way to get enlightened? Now, if you asked Bhagavan that question, you're only going to get one answer out of him, and he said self-inquiry. So he said self-inquiry and explained what it was and how to do it. Now, Ganapati Muni I'm not sure if he was present in the hall or whether he was told about this. I think somebody went up to him on the hill, talked about this exchange, and he casually said, well, if these people are not ready, they're not fit, they're not qualified to undertake self-inquiry properly, they're just villagers passing through, doing their pranams to Bhagavan, going on their way. If they had come to me, I would have told them to do some japa. So news of Ganapati Muni's objection to Bhagavan handing out self-inquiry to all and sundry trickled back to the old hall. And I knew this question was going to come up, so I looked it up, and I've copied it onto my question sheet because I think Bhagavan's answer is absolutely wonderful. So Ganapati Muni's response was conveyed to Bhagavan, and Bhagavan commented, "What to do? This is what I know. If a teaching is to be imparted according to the traditional way, one must first see whether the recipient is qualified or not. Then puja, japa, or dhyana are prescribed step by step. Later, the Guru says that this is all only preliminary and one has to transcend all this. Finally, the ultimate truth that Brahman alone is real is revealed, and to realize this, the direct path of self-inquiry is to be taught. Why this roundabout process? Should we not state the ultimate truth at the beginning, rather than advocating many methods and then rejecting them all at the end?" So for me, this is the truth. I won't say the real Bhagavan. This is Bhagavan laying it out that these other things might be useful in certain circumstances, but they're not going to be the antecedent causes of realization. They might give you some satisfaction, they might give you states of peace, but ultimately they're going to bring you to a point where you understand that you have to get rid of them, that you have to address the nature of the individual I directly, and you have to deal with it through inquiry or surrender, which Bhagavan always said were the only two effective methods. So I think this is a clear case of Bhagavan saying, you don't need any particular preconditions, you don't need any practices. These were a bunch of, I will say, spiritual beginners. Maybe I'm being a bit patronizing here, but they were ordinary village people who just walked in and said, we want to get enlightened, what's the quickest method? And Bhagavan didn't give them pranayama to do, he didn't give them japa to do, he just told them about self-inquiry and asked them to do it. So I think this very clearly demonstrates that he thought it was suitable and available for anyone who was serious about following the practice. I'm going to digress a little bit on this because there are other stories about other devotees claiming that Bhagavan had taught that there were preconditions, there were things that Bhagavan insisted you had to master in order to start self-inquiry. And the most egregious, is that the right word? The most shocking for me is an attempt by B.V. Narasimhaswamy, who was Bhagavan's first English biographer, to rewrite Ramana Gita in the late 1920s and introduce ideas which, to me, are completely alien to what Bhagavan was teaching. Narasimhaswamy said that Bhagavan had said in his expanded version of Ramana Gita that a sound basis in morality was essential for successful self-inquiry. So he was saying that you had to behave in a particular way, you had to have a kind of moral purity, you had to have a good grounded sense of being a good person before you could proceed on to getting rid of your sense of being a person. That this particular idea didn't appear in the original Ramana Gita. It was just something that Narasimhaswamy introduced into his expanded prose rendering, which personally I think he made it up himself. I don't think anything like that was ever said by Bhagavan. In fact, in the original, the real version of Ramana Gita, for want of a better word, Bhagavan did actually say something to the effect that self-inquiry is itself the best way of purification. It's the most meritorious and the most purifying of all activities. So rather than say that one needed to have some kind of moral basis established before one could begin to do self-inquiry, Bhagavan was saying quite clearly that self-inquiry in and of itself had the capacity to make you a pure being. I got some more quotes. So this is something that bugged me. So I looked up a couple of quotes, and it's about the qualifications that one needs to start self-inquiry, and it addresses this particular issue that you have to have a certain background, a certain set of good qualities, a certain sattvic mind, if you like, before you can begin to do self-inquiry adequately, properly, efficiently. And I picked out two quotes in which Bhagavan is saying quite clearly, no, 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 this is not my teaching. So here they are. The first one is from Day by Day with Bhagavan, 1946, and Bhagavan says, "It is no doubt said in some books that one should cultivate one quality after another and thus prepare for ultimate moksha. But for those who follow the Vichara Marga, the path of self-inquiry, their sadhana is itself quite enough for acquiring all divine qualities. They need not do anything else." And there's a very similar reply in the dialogues that precede Satdarshana Bhashya. And there Bhagavan makes the statement, "When one is a sufficiently developed soul, one naturally becomes convinced that the real self awaits inside." To which somebody asks a question, how is this development possible? And Bhagavan replies, various answers are given, but whatever the previous development, Vichara quickens the development. So what Bhagavan is saying is that you don't need to do anything preliminary, you don't need to cultivate good qualities, you don't need to establish yourself on the level of being a good sattvic person. The more you do self-inquiry, the more these things naturally grow and manifest within yourself. They are, in fact, a welcome and beneficial side effect of doing self-inquiry. They're not something that you need to master or get on top of before self-inquiry can begin. So, how do you get good at doing self-inquiry? How do you get ready to do it well? That's the fundamental question. The original question is about whether you need a quiet mind to start, whether a quiet mind is a beneficial starting place. As I've said, Bhagavan went out of his way to say that there are no pre-qualifications, there are no things you have to master or do. Just, if you're interested, sit down and start doing it. According to Bhagavan, the best way to get ready is to do self-inquiry itself, not by engaging in practices that you think might culminate in more effective inquiry. So what he said is that you get good at self-inquiry by repeatedly trying to do it again and again, not by doing other things first or by waiting to become or to attain a certain level of quietness, at which point you think self-inquiry might proceed better or more efficiently. So this is my analogy, not Bhagavan's. I would say if you want to be a good concert pianist, you start off playing the piano, you practice whenever you can until you get good enough at it. You don't spend months or years playing another instrument in the hope it might make you better equipped to start playing the piano. If you want to get good at self-inquiry, the best way to do it is simply to sit down and not be distracted from your piano lessons. Just do it as much as you can. So I would conclude this particular segment by saying my experience, having read all the texts that Bhagavan talked about this, that no one is excluded from trying self-inquiry. My conviction, having read everything Bhagavan said, as said on the topic of preparation, readiness, is that if you want to do it, then you're ready to do it. There isn't a single instance of Bhagavan ever telling anyone that they were not suited for inquiry or that they had to do something else first to pre-qualify them to start. Perhaps that the best example of this, I think, comes from verse 17, Upadesha Undiyar. It's quite short. The first part of the verse gives a quick summary of what self-inquiry is. And it says, when one looks at the form or studies the form of the mind without forgetfulness, it will be discovered there is no such thing as mind. And then his final concluding statement in that verse, he says, this is the direct path for all. For me, this is Bhagavan saying that self-inquiry is available to everyone. It's the direct path for everyone. And there are no people who are not qualified to start it. And you don't need to be in a particular state or a particular condition to do effective self-inquiry. So the key line is the final one. This is the direct path for everyone. As I said, my understanding of Bhagavan's teachings is that anyone is qualified to start. No prerequisites are required. One doesn't need to have followed preliminary paths to quieten the mind. One doesn't need to adopt a particular lifestyle. One doesn't need to have a quiet mind and so on. All one needs is a determination to succeed and a willingness to try the method. So this is all a bit of a digression from the original question, so I will go back to it and attempt to answer it a bit more directly. The question was, what is the relation and difference between keeping quiet and self-inquiry? Does self-inquiry lead to a silent mind, or is a silent mind the basis for practicing self-inquiry? Now, this is my opinion. I'm not going to back this up with Bhagavan, although you can find suggestions that this is also what he said. I think if the mind is already silent and thought-free, there's no need to activate it and split it up into a subject and a perceived objects. That is to say, if you're naturally abiding in a state of silence and peace, you shouldn't immediately think, aha, now I can do good self-inquiry. Don't start a process of inquiry if you're resting contentedly in a state of inner silence. Just enjoy it. It probably won't last for long. Just enjoy the moment of being peaceful, quiet, and enjoy the moment of not having thoughts extrovert and drag your attention anywhere else. There's a phrase, never disturb a sleeping baby. I think that's a good analogy. And any mom knows that once your baby's asleep, you don't start tickling it under the chin or doing anything to it. You just say, thank you very much, baby. And you just enjoy the moment before it wakes up and starts crying again. So if you are quiet, if you're peaceful, then don't disturb it. Don't wake the mind up to start doing self-inquiry, or don't activate it to perform any unnecessary sadhana, just because you feel that you should be doing something to make progress. Now, I've just remembered something. Nisargadatta was once asked, what's the difference between you and me? And he replied, you fill your head with thoughts and then organize fights between them. I don't. That's the only difference. I love this because it's just such a good description of the difference between the jnani and the ajnani. The rising I is just a thought. It's a thought that likes to engage with and fight with other thoughts. If the I rises, it looks for entertainment, it looks to fulfill its desires, or it might look for ways of controlling itself and all the thoughts it gets entangled with. That's when you have the Nisargadatta situation of thoughts battling each other. That's when you might feel that you need to do self-inquiry or some other practice. But as I said at the beginning, if the silence is there, don't disturb it. Don't bring an I into the picture to police or investigate the silence. So going back to the original question, you could say that keeping quiet is a consequence of self-inquiry, but it might also be natural. If it's naturally there, don't disturb it with thought, even an act of self-inquiry. Don't wait for the silence to come and then think, oh, now I'm in the best mental situation to do good self-inquiry. Just don't activate thoughts at all. Just let the silence be there, let the peace be there. Thoughts will come and disturb you sooner or later. Just allow the peace to settle, allow the silence to settle, and don't disturb it with thoughts, activities, one thought fighting another. I will look for my I will find the source of this I. Just leave it in peace. Let the peace be the peace. Inquiry is only necessary if the mind is extroverting and attaching itself to objects. If and when you notice that the mind is engaging in acts of perception, knowing, feeling, and so on, that's when you can step back and try to be aware of the entity that's registering the knowing, the feeling, and the perception. So that's all I have to say on that. There's another question, but if anyone has any follow-ups on that, I'll deal with them first.
There was this one, the question I received from the chat box continued a bit. Maybe I somehow formed it wrongly, but the idea was that controlling speech and breath, we should dive into ourself in a very concentrated point with a concentrated mind, and to find the place where the I arises, or its birthplace. So I think it was more like this than meant to be asking which part of the body where the mind arises.
Okay.
I think it's the more in the mind where
right,
does I come from, I think.
That is something that Bhagavan did say and teach. So that there's an interesting way of understanding this, to find out where in the body the I thought arises, or to find the source of the I, tends to give you the impression or indicate that you need to go looking for it in a particular place. That's not what Bhagavan is saying. That's not what he's teaching. As I said before, if you anticipate the conclusion of that search and you think the I rises for here from this particular place, I will go back to that. I will focus on that place. And by focusing on that place, the I will go back to that place and stay there. That's not going to work. What Bhagavan said is that the rising I will only go back to its source when it ceases to attach itself to objects that you think about, perceive, feel. So the way to make the I go back to its source isn't by imagining where that source is and concentrating on it as an object. The way to make it go back to its source is to be aware of it as a subject and not let any contaminating object thoughts make it stay in an extroverted state. So what he's saying is that the I can only exist when it's in association with other things. It can't exist as a pure I in isolation by itself. It can only manifest or continue, or to appear to continue to exist, by latching onto something. I think this, I see this, I perceive this. If you deprive it of all connections, all associations, then its nature is it has to sink, it has to subside back to its source. And if that subsidence is not interrupted by any more rising desires or thoughts, then it goes back to its source and stays there. So when Bhagavan is saying take the I back to its source, or trace the I thought back to its source, he's not asking you to prejudge where that source might be. He's simply saying that if you subjectively maintain awareness of the I and not let that I connect to anything else, then automatically that I will subside back into its source and disappear. So you find the source by continuous awareness to the I, not by looking for the I in a particular place.
Thank you. So we can continue. There's more questions still, I think.
There's only one that I'm particularly interested in. So let's deal with this one. Yeah, here's one for everybody. Why does self-investigation seem so difficult? That's everybody's problem. There is a difference between saying that self-inquiry is the most direct method for getting enlightened and saying that it's quick and easy. It may well be the most direct method, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to produce quick results or it's an easy technique to follow. I think the experience of most people is that it's unremitting hard work with very little sign that one is making progress. you can do inquiry for decades and still feel you're in the same state as day one when you try to do it for the first time. I spoke about the analogy of learning to play the piano and practicing every day. I don't think it's possible that you could practice playing the piano for 20 years and then get up one day and not be able to play a note. But that's what happens with self-inquiry. You can do it again and again and again, and some days it feels like you've never done it in your life before, and you think, what am I doing? Why am I so bad at this? I mentioned earlier about Laxmanaswamy. I wrote a book about him long ago, 40 years ago. He realized the self in Bhagavan's presence in the 1940s. So he's definitely someone whose expert testimony can be brought in here. He had a very interesting maxim. He said it's the devotee's job to make the effort and the guru's job to ascertain the progress. The devotee can't ascertain his own progress and the guru can't make the effort for him. So what he's saying is, don't necessarily believe that you're in a terrible state. Don't believe that you're not making progress. Don't believe that your efforts are all being wasted or that you're not heading in the right direction, because it's the very nature of the mind that if you have a mind, you don't have a valid instrument to determine whether you've made progress or not. That there are little clues that might indicate that you're heading in the right direction. Bhagavan once said, to whatever extent one is free from unwanted thoughts, to that extent one is making progress. That's one good way of checking to see how your practice is developing. But I think most people would feel that they almost never have periods when they're completely free from unwanted thoughts. Another good way of checking up on yourself is to see what your level of enthusiasm is. How often do you feel inspired to go to self-inquiry and sit down and stick with it for long periods? How excited are you about the prospect of getting back to it? The more enthusiastic you feel about it, the more you want to go back to it. I think the more you can take that as a sign that you're moving in the right direction, even if your mind does appear to be busy, even if inquiry doesn't seem to be stopping your mind for more than a fraction of a second. If you do have occasional periods of thought-free mental silence, or if you do have this massive enthusiasm to keep trying, then you are definitely heading in the right direction. I will mention, by the way, Laxmanaswamy saying that you're not qualified to ascertain your own state. He realized the self with Bhagavan on Vijayadashami in 1949, that would be October. There was a little book brought out by his brother, and in that book, Laxmanaswamy is complaining about being tormented by his ego and saying what a terrible state he is and how he's not making any progress. And that was a few weeks before his final realization. So the bottom line is, if you still have a functioning mind, you can't tell where you are spiritually, you can't tell how far you've come, and you definitely can't tell how close you are to realization. If you're putting in the work, if you're doing the inquiry as per Bhagavan's instructions, then I think that's all you can do. You can't judge how well you're progressing. You might think you're not making progress. You might think it's hard work, and it really is hard work, but you're not really in a position to determine, let's say, the bit of the iceberg that's under the surface. You can't see what's going on in the depths of your mind, how good your inquiry is or how good it has been at getting rid of all your vast backlog of vasanas. I get lots of emails from people who are trying self-inquiry and failing in their own eyes to make any progress. And they tend to say, what am I doing wrong? I think that's, I won't say it's a legitimate conclusion, but I think it's the wrong one. They're not doing anything wrong. They're simply not getting tangible results. They're not getting endless long periods of peace, bliss, and happiness. So they think, I must be doing something wrong. Why am I not getting all these spectacular results? My attitude, my answer to this is, if you're following Bhagavan's instructions, if you're putting attention on the I, whenever you recollect that your attention is elsewhere, then you are doing it correctly. Doing it correctly doesn't mean getting instant results. It just means following the method properly, looking at what your mind is doing, framing perceptions as things that are seen or registered by a subject, taking attention off the objects and putting back on the subject. Whenever you recollect that your mind is strayed, this is what you do. If you're doing that, then don't worry about whether you're experiencing tangible good results or not. Don't anticipate, don't hope, don't predict what should happen when you do this, because you're going to be disappointed. Don't have any expectations at all. Don't think that you're not good at it, that you're not getting results. Ideas like this just keep the mind busy and distractive. I think it's in Who Am I? Bhagavan says, don't beat yourself up thinking I am a great sinner, I am a great sinner. Your recriminations about how bad you are worse for you than whatever act you might have committed that made you think you were a great sinner in the first place. So I think the same thing applies to self-inquiry. Just do it, do the best you can, bring attention back to the I whenever you can, and don't think you're not good at it, don't think you're a bad person, don't think you're doing it wrongly. Have faith. We talked a little bit about having faith in the Guru, having faith in his teachings, having faith that what the Guru tells you is true and correct. I think this is a good example of this. Do the inquiry, follow the instructions that Bhagavan gives, leave the results to him, and don't try and convince yourself that you're doing it badly or wrongly simply because you're not getting the results that you originally anticipated. What else? You need to have a determination to succeed. There needs to be a strong hunger to reach the source and stay there. And this includes having a determination not to be distracted by anything else that's going on in your life or in your mind. I think this is something that perhaps isn't fully appreciated. The mind moves towards whatever it is most interested in. You may think or believe that you want liberation more than anything else, but if the mind runs off to experiences rather than back towards the self, that's an indication that those desires for things outside of yourself are stronger than your desire to reach the self. You need to be able to catch the mind doing these things and say to it, I'm not going to indulge in those kinds of thoughts right now. I don't want them. I don't need them. I want to go back to the self. And then, as Nike says on its ad, just do it. Learn to say no to whatever the mind wants you to play with, whatever the mind wants you to enjoy. That's not the way. You just have to buckle down. You have to say, no, this is what I want. Nothing else is truly important. I'm going to ignore the things that are preventing me from knowing myself right here, right now. And I'm going to take my mind back to the self. Have this sense of determination, have this sense that this is something so important, nothing else really matters. Back to Papaji, he had a really good illustration of this, which I tell to many people. He said, imagine your clothes are on fire and that the only way to put them out is to run 100 meters to a river and jump in. As you are running towards the river, you encounter a friend who invites you into his house for a cup of coffee. Do you stop for a drink or do you keep running? So he said, similarly, you have to have a strong desire to run to the self, to put out the flames of your personal suffering. That desire has to be so strong that nothing else has the capacity to divert you. When no other thought, when no other desire has the power to divert you from moving swiftly towards the self, then that's when you reach it. I think people just expect results without having the determination to seek the source and the determination to not say no to all the things that are keeping them away from it. There's a Sanskrit term comes on a list that Adi Shankara made about the, let's say, preconditions, the things you have to have in order to be able to realize the self. And number 4 is this word called mumukshutva. It's an insatiable hunger that pulls you towards the self and doesn't let you get sidelined by distractions. This is what we all need to have. We have to have this this hunger, this feeling. This is what I want. This is what I need. Nothing else is going to stop me from getting there. This is back to the person with the burning clothes. In that situation, you don't stop, you don't deviate, you just run and you jump in the river. The mumukshutva is that same hunger, that same feeling of I want this, nothing else matters, nothing is going to stop me from getting there. So the original question is why does self-investigation seem so difficult? And the answer is mostly because we lack the requisite discrimination to say no to the things that pull us away from the self. Good self-inquiry is not just saying, who am I, or going back to the I thoughts when we realize that mind is enmeshed with objects. It's learning to say no to the mind when it wants to take us on an extroverting journey. Bit depressing, but that's the way it is. I think we're all in that boat, that we haven't learned to say no to the mind, and we haven't established ourselves in the heart, in the peace and silence of the heart long enough for the mind to realize and register the fact that the heart is a better place to be than wherever the mind wants to run off to. So I think ultimately you succeed when the inner silence and the peace becomes more attractive than whatever the mind dangles in front of you to distract you. You have to reach the point where staying home and the inner peace becomes so natural and so attractive, you don't have to keep hauling the wandering mind back in. Once you've got a repeated taste of that state of going back home and staying there, mind will naturally want to go back there because it knows it will be happier, more content there than in the outside world. That's the tipping point that we all have to aim for, that instead of being pulled outwards and having to drag ourselves reluctantly back towards the silence, towards the peace, the silence will become so obviously self-manifest that we will just naturally start moving towards it more and more regularly until we stay there and don't leave it. So with that, I'll stop for now. Happy to answer any follow-up questions, so long as they relate to Bhagavana's teachings. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, David. It was wonderful. Does anybody have some questions related to these topics?
I have a question
Okay.
about like, to me, I mean, I've been trying, I get up every day and I practice, or I read, or I study. I mean, is it beneficial to practice with somebody else that's on the same boat or same level? Because like I'd like to do this every day, and I've been doing it every day. I get up very early and I start the practice, and because what you say, and I read about the determination is so important, and I think the people here are devoted in a similar way to how I am, and I don't know if anybody would want to do this. I mean, I have a Zoom room and people could meet and we could talk about it, or is inquiry something you should just do by yourself? I mean, to me, it's beneficial to talk with other people of like minds about it, or maybe try to practice with others. Or David, is it something you should just do in your basement by yourself?
And anything that makes you want it more, anything that makes you practice more is good. That's a very pragmatic approach to, should I do this, should I do not, should I do that? If you have friends who are saying, you know, turn your TV off, let's meditate, that's probably good. It's nice to have people who are a bit more enthusiastic, a bit more keen than you, people who keep you on the straight and narrow. It's not necessary, but it's always good to have people on your wavelength, people who resonate with the things that are important to you, people who appreciate and encourage you, who don't roll their eyes when you say you're going off to meditate for a couple of hours. in Tiruvannamalai, it's a luxury. Everybody you meet on the street is on your wavelength to some extent. They're all spiritual people. They've all come there for a spiritual reason, or the vast majority have. It's a lot rarer in a Western society to find fellow travelers, people who even take you seriously, who don't laugh at what you're trying to do.
There ain't nobody in Montana, man. Like,
If you have any opportunity to do it in person, then that's good. If you're in the wilds of Montana, then try and do it by Zoom. It's always good to have a sangha of some sort to encourage you, to help you move in the right direction. It's really, I know from what people tell me, it's really, really tough to be by yourself in the West, to fight Western mind streams, Western culture streams, and find that space by yourself. You just feel like you're an alien who's just landed on Earth, and no one really is helping you, supporting you on your wavelengths. It can be quite depressing.
And we have this new idea about spiritual bypassing, that we are doing this because we are losers. And you know, this is very modern now in this Advaita psychologists which are talking about spiritual bypassing. And what was the point of Bhagavan? Because we always talk that he never say to people don't lose their job, etc. But if we are in a situation where we can do this self-inquiry, but all the world is saying better do more money or something like that, make your life more comfortable. We are in that situation all around here in the West. And do we have this insurance that Bhagavan will take care of us if we are doing self-inquiry, yes or not?
I think he'll take care of you. If you think about him, he thinks about you, and he's on your side, and he's taking care of you. He only said, if you have responsibilities, if you have a family, if you have a job, then don't give them up because you think you can advance spiritually by giving them up. He said you never make spiritual progress by giving up your worldly responsibilities. He said there's no conflict or clash between fulfilling your worldly duties and obligations and making spiritual progress. He said you can do your work, you can put your attention on your mind, on the self in your spare time. Don't think you have to abandon your lifestyle or your family to make spiritual progress. So he wasn't in favor of renunciation as a tool or an aid to spiritual growth. If during his lifetime, if you did turn up as, say, a young single person in your 20s, you had the means to support yourself, you didn't have 3 kids back home or you'd run away from, he'd say, fine, you can stay here, you can meditate all day if you want to. But he never encouraged anyone who had any responsibilities anywhere else to give up those responsibilities. He always said, go back, do your job, look after your family, and do your practice in your spare time.
David, can you expand just this idea that, okay, there is only 2 states according to Bhagavan, the state of sleep, so we are now in sleep. When we are going to sleep, we are in sleep again, and then we are in sleep without dreams. So there are 2, yes?
I think Bhagavan would say there's only one state, it's the state of self.
The state of
the state of self is covered up by the mind, by a sense of personal identity, which says, I am a person who lives inside a body. So that person will go to sleep, wake up, have a dream, end the dream by going back to sleep or by waking up. So the alternating states are phases of the mind. They're not phases of the self. So the only true state is the self. That doesn't change. It never gets modified. It doesn't come and go. What does get modified, what does change, what does come and go are the alternating states of the mind. So Bhagavan said that if you eradicate the I, who goes to sleep, who wakes up, who has the dreams, who wakes up from the dreams, then these states may well continue, but because the I is absent, you'll be fully aware of the self. The locus of identity, the place that you know yourself to be, will no longer be a false I who goes to sleep and wakes up. It will be the self, it will be Prajna, it will be consciousness. And you will then know that all these other states, the sleeping body state that you talked about, these are just transient phases that come and go on the screen, on the substratum of the self. They are not you, they are not real states. They are simply states that you take to be real, simply because you're invested in the idea that you're an individual person who has these experiences of these states.
So my mind is in this dream now, yes?
If you're in the waking state, Bhagavan said this is no different from the dream that you experience at night. There is an individual who has created a dream world which is a superimposition on what is. I don't think Bhagavan is saying that trees are created by this. What he's saying is that you superimpose a wrong idea of an external world, and you see things as different and separate from yourself. You have an internal I who puts a superstructure on what is true and what's real, which is the indivisible, formless self, and it creates an idea that there are things which are different and separate from you. When this I wakes up from the waking dream, then there's the understanding that there never was separation, there never were separate egos, there never were separate selves. There was a one prevailing self, a substratum in which all these things appeared, but you had an idea, and that idea created a superimposition, a structure on top of reality, which you believed in, which you bought into, and which caused you suffering. You limited yourself to an individual form, an individual body, and that limitation somehow created the idea that there were other forms separate and apart from you. But when you wake up to reality, when your dream person disintegrates and goes away, the idea that there are separate people, separate worlds, separate egos, that goes along with it.
So are we saying that we are here now looking like 15 people, but there is no gap between us? Like in a dream, there is mind and mind alone. So this means that I am in Bulgaria, you are maybe in India, etc., etc. Everybody of us is nothing but Bhagavan by definition, but seemingly...
Everything and everyone is Bhagavan, but there is no time and space in the self. You don't say we're all in Bulgaria or Bulgaria is in me. Time and space are, if you like, emergent properties of the I thought. When the I thought rises, then all of these properties, these functions, these parameters arise, which govern this false world that you've created for yourself and which you live in. And when you yourself walk out of the dream, when you wake up from it, there's nothing left of that dream world. But when you wake up from your nighttime dream in the morning and somebody says, oh, go back, you know, you forgot to bring your sandwiches with you from the dream, go back and collect them. You think, no, that's stupid. That dream world doesn't exist. The people in that dream world didn't exist. There is nothing there to go back to and collect. It was just a figment of my imagination. So in the same way, when you wake up in the morning, you know that there wasn't a real world there, that the time and the space in that world were created simply for that landscape to make sense inside your own head. In the same way, the waking world has its own space, time, rules that make it look like it's a real world. But when you take the next step back from the waking state to reality, to Brahman, then there's the understanding that time and space were also invented with the rising of the I thought.
David, for example, our meeting now, everything is passing. Even this moment is is not here anymore. This vanishes with my words.
Mhm.
Are we saying that we are in the end of time in each moment, and in fact this is the act of Ishvara now and now and now? So we somehow looking together, creating the world in each moment and disappearing in it, because it's where is Ramana now? But yes, because we are talking about a boy who, for example, I'm investigating Ibn Arabi. He lived before 600 or 700 years. And if I take some examples from Ramana and read it to Ibn Arabi group, they will say that this is Ibn Arabi. It's quote are point to the point, the same words. But we are
Well,
talking. Where is
this-
Ibn Arabi? Where is Ramana? But in this, are you, David, now creating Ramana in Bhagavan's dream for us in order to investigate? And that's why I'm pointing. This is my taste of this conversation, because if it is Drishti Shrishti Vada, this means that we are in the very strange situation, like looking like solipsism, but we are in solipsism. At least somebody has to be there, yes. But the teaching is that Milen is not, yes. Do you understand? I just want you to expand this feeling of strangeness that where is Ramana now? Aruna Chawa?
Bhagavan often quoted an old Tamil text called Arabal Odukam. He didn't often say that's the text he was quoting, but it has some very distinctive analogies which he used again and again. And they only appear in this text, so we know he was quoting this text. And right near the beginning, there's one that you probably know about, and it's the lion that roars in the dream of the elephant. So in a dream, an elephant is dreaming, and in that dream, it sees a lion, and the lion is the only thing that the elephant is afraid of. Nothing else bothers it, but it is afraid of the lion. So the lion roars in the elephant's dream. The elephant wakes up. So where is the lion? So that the lion in this analogy is the guru. So in the dream of the elephant was suffering. The lion, the guru, came along and it roared. The elephant woke up. Can you now say that the lion was real and it still exists in the dream world? What has actually happened is that the elephant woke up from its dream. It needed the form of the lion. It needed the sound of the lion to roar at it, to scare it into wakefulness. But once it's got to the state of wakefulness, there is the understanding that both its own form and the form of the guru in that projected dream were both equally real, but the form of that guru in the dream had sufficient power to wake the elephant up from its dream and abolish the elephant's dream. So the question, where is Ramana? If you apply it to that, Ramana's form appears in our dream. Ramana roars, if you like. He says, wake up. He says, Suma Iru, be still. Or he says, do self-inquiry. Or he directs some energy towards us. Then, if we're lucky, if it's our destiny, then we wake up. So where is Ramana? Where is the Ramana in that situation? We haven't left him in the dream. There's just the understanding that the form we took to be Ramana, the form that we saw on the sofa, was instrumental in waking us up from an unreal world in which we saw him as different and separate from us. And that power that came from him was a wake-up call that abolished our dream world, after which we no longer identified with our own form. We no longer saw a Guru Ramana who had a form. There was simply the formless self.
So each now of us is somehow in this moment acting like a lion in our personal dream. You
were all in a dream waiting for the lion to roar and wake you up, at which point you laugh and say, well, how did I possibly believe in all that nonsense?
Thank you very much.
All right.
Jeff, you have your hand raised, please.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I just, and it was kind of about, you'd said, do it in your spare time, and and I was thinking of retiring, and I could retire, but my wife wants me to keep working, and she said to me, I think it was Romana, like, well, she's like, why can't you practice at work? Like, because to me, it's like, it isn't about spare time or finding time. It to me is the point to be trying to do this all, just be even as I talk, or even as I'm listening or seeing or driving or doing anything, to be looking within, or to somehow, I mean, to me, that isn't that the point of inquiry? Just no matter what, if any question comes, any thought comes, well, where did it come from? What's its source? To be not just to be doing it 100% of the time. I mean, and I think if you are doing it 100% of the time, and then I'll get to work and the kid will bug me or something, and it'll pull me away. But then if I look, well, who's being pulled away? And I'm looking within always. I mean, is that the teaching? To be looking within always? I mean, am I on track when I say that, or
Yeah.
do I?
So what Bhagavan was saying is that if you have any obligation that requires your mind, your intellect, discharge it properly, put full effort into it. But in all the times that your mind or your attention is not required by your job or your family or whatever duties you have, then try to put the mind back in its source. So he said everybody has some time during the day. No one is so booked up they can't do this. They're in the bathroom, they're walking to work, they're shopping. Don't tell me you've got zero time. Do what you have to do. If you're a busy person, then complete your job, complete your obligations, but don't come and tell me you've got no time. Everybody has time, they just waste it.
No, that's good. This is good, because like I could do my job kind of with my eyes closed. So like I've been doing it for so long, and so I guess I got a pretty good job for that. So thank you.
But David, isn't that Jeff is talking action in the sense that Ramana view, at least which I know, is that all actions are predetermined. So can we say that whatever we say, we don't have choice but to do it? I have to be here now because this is action. I am doing it. So I cannot be on a walk now, but only here. No matter what I was thinking before 3 hours, I supposed to be here by definition if the actions are fixed and determined. This is a question.
What Bhagavan always said is that though your actions are scripted and predetermined, the idea I am the performer of these actions is not. He said the body has a particular destiny, a sequence of activities it's going to go through, but there's nothing in that destiny that says you have to continuously suffer from the idea I am the person who is performing these actions. So Bhagavan said that's your one true freedom, that within the somewhat limited script of things having to happen, you always have absolute freedom to not identify with the body that's performing its scripted actions.
So this is in Ashtavakra, they are saying, throw away the black snake of egoism, I am the doer, and live happily. Can you expand of this idea about the doership like a free way to happiness? If you are free from the idea of doership, in fact, you success in self-inquiry in some way.
The individual I, the I thought, is ultimately the doer. So ahamkara, the I doer, the I performer, when that goes, you have lost your capacity to choose, you've lost your capacity to make decisions, you've lost your capacity to have the feeling, I am doing this, I am performing this action. If you have an individual identity, then the next thing that comes up is, what do I do next? If you think I am a person, then you have to make choices, you have to make decisions. But once this sense of being a person, of having an identity that's limited to a body goes, then it's the power of the self that animates you, that makes you do the things you do. It makes you say the things that you do. You are no longer in there pretending to be the person who makes the choices and decisions for what the body will do. The body will be animated by the self. you'll be out of the picture. It will be a very pleasant, peaceful life. The things that the body needs to do, it will do them well, and it will be done without any mental agitation. It will be done without anticipation. It will be done without intention. The things that need to happen will happen, and they'll get done very well. There won't be an I in the picture at all. There will be no sense of agency, no sense of I live in this body, I am performing this action. And when the I am the doer idea goes, then all the other things go with it, include karma. Karma cannot be accrued or attached to a non-existent I. It can only be attached to the idea of the I. And when you abolish the idea of the I through self-inquiry, through realization, then karma also ends. That there's nothing left that can carry forward and make you do or be anything in the future. You've lost the capacity to be governed by karma because you've lost the I to which the karma was attached. You've lost the ability to be reincarnated. It's the idea that you have, I am a person, that makes you come back again and again. It's the idea, I am the person, I am the doer, that makes you engage in activities. Once you get rid of this I am the doer idea, the sense I am an individual who lives in a body, all these things go. You no longer imagine yourself to be a person. You no longer are a victim of karma. You no longer have to reincarnate. All of these things are activities that happen to an unreal I, an I that's believed in because you don't look at it properly.
But what about this part that, you know, in many traditions, in Kashmiri Shaivism, etc., they somehow keep some after realization and after the human death, they are keeping somehow a false individuality in order to enjoy the beauty of the words which Bhagavan created, but in conscious way. You know this idea. And they are saying that Advaita idea means disappearing because you cannot enjoy more the beauty of the words, of the music. So they're saying, what is the point to be just this pure consciousness, which without objects cannot taste the beauty of the music, like Aranjuez, the beauty of Aranchawa, etc. So they prefer to stay in a state of lover and lovership, so some count to keep somehow individuality in this. You know this idea, because now we are enjoying Bhagavan teachings. You are enjoying this beautiful mountain behind you, etc. But in disappearing of your body, if you are enlightened, everything will be like in the deep sleep. They are saying so, and they are saying. Who is going in the movie to look only blank screen? You want to enjoy the movie. Am I clear in my question?
You're completely clear, and I think that's a long series of erroneous suppositions that these people are making.
Me too.
The people I've moved with, they are capable of enjoyment. They enjoy food, they enjoy going for walks, they enjoy literature. I mean, Bhagavan, for example, he really enjoyed reading old texts, stories about the saints. This was after his realization. He wasn't staring at a blank screen. He enjoyed cooking, he enjoyed looking after the people who came. All of these people lived and moved and functioned very efficiently in the world. They interacted with it, but they knew that there was no longer a chooser, a doer, a decider, an enjoyer. If you refuse to let go of the enjoyer, then you come back. You come back because you have desires to enjoy. The enjoyer can only exist along with a desire to enjoy. What the Jnanis are saying in the Advaita tradition is if you have any pending desires at all, then you have to come back. You have to come back and be reborn to enjoy them again.
There was a question online before I forget. Sreni Koppolu had hand up. Do you want to ask something before you forget?
Yeah, sure. Sure. Hi, David. Om Namo Ramanaya. As part of self-inquiry, I try my best, like any other devotees, like we do. It seems to be as part of like a ego mind. It seems to be very easy when you are quiet, when you have no one around, when it is early mornings. That it seems to be very quiet. We can just bring the mind back to the source and just be quiet and enjoy the peace. And if you're in a situation where you're in a busy office work and or in a very stressful situations, arguing with your some relation or friend or anyone, if you're in the midst of all these busy things, it seems to be very difficult to attend to the self. You don't get to that kind of idea about, oh, I'm in the wrong place. I should go back to the self, or I should why I'm doing all these things, or why I'm giving importance to all these things. So, do you have any suggestions or anything that to have the mind or to have this kind of a thread that runs all the time, and it gives a reminder back to us and say, hey, oh, have that kind of things and try going back to self, even if you are in the midst of very worldly thing or very important things for the world.
I always pass on the advice that Bhagavan gave to, I forget which devotee it was, but might have been Rangan. It was somebody who had an absolutely disastrous domestic life. I think he had 7 unmarried daughters and no job. I mean, it's the worst possible scenario for an Indian dad. But Bhagavan said, do what you have to do in this world. In your spare time, take the mind back to its source. Enjoy the quietness and the peace in the time that you have by yourself. And if you do that well enough, if you do that efficiently enough, then the silence that accumulates in your spare time will spill over into the times when you have to be busy, when people are going to start arguments with you. It's a bit like putting deposits in your silence bank. In your spare time when you're by yourself, you can do your inquiry, and you can build up your silence, you can build up your equanimity, and then, okay, it's 9 o'clock, I have to be in the office. You walk into the office and there's a level of serenity, clarity that's come from the practice that you've done in your spare time. You can't, unless you really are some great saint, do your self-inquiry or be equanimous in the office in the midst of all the fights. But what you can do is build up enough silence, enough peace in your spare time, so that when you do walk into your living room and the kids are fighting, or when the boss summons you to his office to shout at you, then there's a background silence, there's a background that you've built up in your spare time. So you just build up your bank account of quietness in the time when other people are not pestering you, not bothering you, and then that slowly spreads out, percolates out, and fills in the rest of your day. I think that's the way to go. You can't do good inquiry if your brain is seriously on an intellectual problem in your office, or you're trying to sort out some domestic drama. You can do it in the quiet times of the day. And if you do that well enough and you get quiet and peaceful enough in your downtime, then the peace you get in your downtime percolates into the rest of your life.
Yeah, thank you, David. I think that makes very sense. The deposit that we make it and spilling over, I think unconsciously, I think Bhagavan will just probably gives the glimpse when you're in the midst of it. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you. No more Ramanaya.
I have one question, David, to you about this mystery of violence in this world. For example, in Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna is the best warrior, but he understands the truth, which is revealed by Krishna. But the advice and what is going to happen is not to put the weapon aside, but to go and to kill these people in the dream. So this and this is very strange. Of course, we are thinking of Bhagavad Gita. If we are in this Drishti Shrishti moment, this is about us. This is about our living in this life. This mystery to talk with sage and not to leave the weapon. Your thoughts?
The Hindu notion of what you should do and should not do is not monolithic. It's not like the Western tradition of thou shalt not kill. In the Hindu tradition, there are the various ashramas. It's the warrior's job to fight. If the warrior puts down his sword and decides to meditate, then he's violating his dharma. If the sannyasin picks up a club and starts hitting somebody with it, he's violating his dharma. So each group has its own rules. It's not a common set of rules for all of them. Arjuna was a warrior. He was a kshatriya. It was his job to take up arms. It was his job because God told him to take up arms. And when he said, I can't do it, they're my family, I think Krishna reminded him that these are your obligations. I'm telling you that all these people have already died by my hand. You're simply the instrument. But then Arjuna himself was contemplating violating his dharma as a warrior because the people he was about to kill were connected by family. So that this is a different situation. So, for example, at Ramanashram in the 1920s, a group of robbers invaded and they physically attacked Bhagavan, and one of Bhagavan's attendants wanted to rush after them with a big stick and attack them back. And Bhagavan said, no, we are sadhus, we have a sadhu dharma. Our dharma is not to resist. Our dharma is not to inflict violence on other people. We can't violate our sadhu dharma by running after these thieves and attacking them. We need to be patient. We need to be tolerant. So the sadhu, the sannyasi dharma is not to react to being attacked, whereas the kshatriya dharma insists that if you are a warrior, you obey the legitimate orders of your superior. In this case, it was Krishna giving the orders, and he was morally, culturally obligated to go out and do the things he had to do.
A question from Yaroslav, who couldn't participate, but he got it sent, this question that did Siva Prakasam Pillai write anything about Bhagavan himself? I didn't know how to answer, so I don't know.
So for those who don't know, Siva Prakasam Pillai was the person who persuaded Bhagavan to give out his first teachings in 1902. Bhagavan was not speaking at the time, so Siva Prakasam Pillai asked the questions and Bhagavan wrote the answer either on the slate or on the sand in front of the Mantapam where he was staying. Siva Prakasam Pillai wrote everything down later from memory, and then nothing happened to it. This was 1902, and then this collection of sayings came out under the title Nanya, Who Am I, as an appendix to a booklet he brought out in 1923 called Sri Ramana Charitra Ahval. And this, I think, was the first biography or Tamil biography of Bhagavan that ever came out. It was quite short, but it was authored by Siva Prakasam Pillai, and it did contain basic information about Bhagavan's life. So I think from the point of view of the devotees, they were far more interested in this set of teachings, which was an appendix in this Tamil 1923 biography. So they published that separately and started selling it at Ramanashram. And 3 years later, in 1926, Bhagavan himself was interested enough and satisfied with the content that it was his teachings that he himself rewrote the whole thing in the form of an essay. And that's now the standard form of that particular set of teachings. But its origin was an appendix in a very small booklet that Siva Prakasam brought out in 1923 that contained a small Tamil biography of Bhagavan.
Right. Thank you. So, 2.5 hours went quite quickly. Is there any more questions?
Yes, David, I would like to ask in relation to the question that was here today about dharma, and I mean this subject, that for example, in case of Krishna, he had to fight because he was kshatriya, but and Bhagavan as Swami had also different dharma, so he could not fight back. And I just wanted to ask, just maybe, as I understand, but he was like, of course, normal person, very empathic. I mean, and so on. I mean that some perfect being. I mean, for example, there was a case when. I don't remember. Maybe this was the same woman who got in some dangerous situation on the mountain, and she was calling for help, and Bhagavan rushed to her to help. So I mean, it is something different, right? It's just normal reaction of normal human. I mean, of course, he was not like normal human being, but I mean that. So it was normal reaction to just help someone who needs help, right? It's
Right. I think you're remembering the story of Kirapati.
Yeah.
She lived in the same Mantapam where Bhagavan had written "Who Am I?" and he was at Virupaksha cave, which is about 300 meters away. So she screamed loudly enough for her voice to carry, and he realized that if he's hearing her, something's gone wrong. She's a woman living by herself in a Mantapam on the hill. So he came down as quickly as he could, and there had been some kind of robbery. She hadn't been attacked, but she had been disturbed by people who wanted to steal some of her meager possessions. She'd called out, and Bhagavan had come to her rescue. I think there was, apart from the basic human decency of him coming to his neighbor's help, I think she had a strong devotional attachment and dependency on Bhagavan, and I think somehow he was responding to that as well. I think that particular relationship was such that when she called for help, possibly even at a psychic level, he would have felt the command to come down and help her, because that was the relationship they had.
Does it mean that if it haven't been like to connect to him, some person who had this strong connection to him, that he would not just come and help? Or it is like
Generally speaking, he was the most helpful person in any given situation. He didn't believe in being a professional do-gooder. He didn't believe in, for example, starting campaigns to get rid of child marriage or anything like this. But if he saw any kind of person, animal, even a tree in his neighborhood that wasn't being treated well, then he would make a point of saying, no, this is not good. This person, this tree, this animal needs better treatment. But he didn't extend that to a campaign in general for the wider world. I think his attitude was act in a compassionate way locally. When you see suffering, don't tolerate it. Make sure you do something about it, but don't spend your whole life looking for people to help. Just if you happen to bump into people who, for whatever reason, need your assistance, then help them as much as you can.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. So, should we call it a day? Or is there something else in mind?
I just want to, I don't, the book Be As You Are, that to me, I've like, I mean, Ramana is in that book, and I just so appreciate that book. So thank you for writing it. It's my favorite book of all time, and it just changed my life almost. So it did change my life. So thank you. It helped me spiritually so much. So I appreciate it.
Well, if that's all for now, of course, want to thank David. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, people who
Thank
joined.
you. Very pleasant evening. Thank you, everyone, for listening.